What's going on, guys, and welcome to another episode of Smash JT. Some of you might be looking at the screen right now and seeing a thread from 1 year ago on GameFAQs that I brought up here saying seems like limited run games is getting competition, and wondering why am I talking about a topic that was posted a year ago? Well, it looks like this concern may have bloomed into a full-on disaster. For those of you who are not familiar with limited run games, they are a company that produces games, niche games, in limited quantities, and once they produce them and sell them and they're gone, no more are ever made ever again. So there is some initial hype behind many of the titles to get in and get them. Oftentimes you can put a game in your shopping cart, but if you're not signed in and logged in soon enough and you go to purchase it and it's already sold out, you can't get it. You're SOL. It's frustrated plenty of people in the past, especially for titles they were really looking forward to, but in a way it gives people a reason to get excited for physical copies of games that otherwise would not exist without a company like Limited Run in the first place making them. The controversy stemming from this initial thread on GameFAQs a year ago, blooming into an all-out disaster, kinda came to a head today when Douglas Bogart, the co-founder and owner of Limited Run Games, tweeted, "Woof. This industry moves quick. Stuff I literally just said no to less than a month ago got announced recently. Too many people doing this now. The market is getting too packed. The limited aspect isn't even attractive anymore to most people." That is from the owner and co-founder of Limited Run Games, saying that the industry is getting too crowded, that too many people are doing it, and most gamers aren't even attracted to trying to get the games anymore. They're inundated with limited games from every orifice, and they just say, you know what, there's too many to pick from, so it becomes almost an over-analysis paralysis, where there's just too many options, too many things to buy, and you just throw your hands up and say, I'm just not going to get any of these. Why am I even doing this in the first place? When Limited Run Games first started, it was very unique. It brought something to the game industry that was in dire need of someone supporting indie titles getting physical releases. And to a degree, it still exists today in that facet. But in addition to companies like Limited Run Games, we also now have strictly limited games. We also now have Play Asia making limited run of specific titles. We also now have I Am 8-Bit making limited quantities of games, along with a massive amount of other companies putting limited run games together in their own way. Sometimes it's directly from the publisher. This is something that nobody could have predicted, especially when Limited Run got started. It was such a niche thing. A lot of gamers that weren't in the know had no idea it even existed. Limited Run was very niche. And as it grew in popularity, there was a market defined by it. Strictly Limited Games was the next to really make a huge impact. They're based over in Europe. They do some pretty popular games as well. But what Douglas Bogart is saying here is that he used to have to be selective about what games his company would choose to make for sale for Limited Run Games. And he says, I just said no less than a month ago, and it got announced recently by another company. So basically what he's saying is, I'm saying no, I'm being selective on the games that we're going to sell limited, and then there are other companies swooping in and just generically selling these games limited just to get a piece of that limited pie. And it's become overrun with tons of different suppliers flooding the markets with products that people aren't necessarily clamoring for. Yes, there are some people that want everything physical, and I get that. I want everything physical as well. But that doesn't mean I'm going to buy every single game that ever comes out physically. I'm going to pick and choose what games are available and which ones I'm going to want in my collection, which is what Douglas is saying here. He's hand-picking games that he would want in a collection, where some of these other companies, not going to necessarily name names because I don't know who he's speaking about or what game he's talking about, but it is curious that the owner of Limited Run Games has expressed these concerns. Too many people doing this now. The market is getting too packed. Like I said, there are a ton of different companies that are doing this right now, and I only named a few of them. Davey said, have to agree wholeheartedly, Doug. Too many people doing it now, and it's sucking the fun out of it. Basically, I'm limiting myself to the couple I have a substantial collection for. Super Nintendo replied, if everything is limited, then nothing is. Gotta figure out another hook to stand out. Maybe start going retro, Wii, Wii U, PS3, etc. I'm sure there's a good amount of game publishers that would jump at that. To which Davey replied, Limited Run Games did do Oddworld Stranger's Wrath a couple months ago for PS3, and that is true. They also did Axiom Verge Multiverse Edition on the Wii U. That took a long time to come out, and there's quite a story behind that, but it did eventually come out. So yes, Limited Run Games has released retro catalog games previously. The Lone Wolf said, you talking about that one Switch game bundle from you-know-who? Douglas replied, just a general statement. He didn't want to single anyone out in particular. Lone Wolf replied, I see what you mean though. So many companies in the market. Only way to compete is to stay unique in offering something the competition doesn't. But the problem is with what Doug is saying here is his market, his niche was limited run games, specific titles that you could only get there, and once they were sold out, they were gone. And the problem with more and more companies joining in on this niche market is it's flooding it with titles that people aren't necessarily clamoring for. And by doing that, it's over-analysis paralysis. Like I said, even if there's a game you really want, if you see tons of other games come up from tons of other limited publishers, a lot of people, including myself, look at it and say, do I really need these games right now? There's so many of them out there, and I already have a ton right now. Why don't I just chill and not spend the money if I don't need to? And that is exactly what Doug is getting at right now. If Limited Run was still the only company selling these niche games in a short supply, I honestly would have more interest in them. But because the market has such an influx of tons of sellers with tons of new games, it's kind of making me throw my hands up and say, I don't really care about these games anymore because there's too many of them in the first place. That's exactly why Limited Run Games is my main focus. I'll always appreciate open pre-orders over limited releases. That's something they've been doing recently, making a lot more people happy. Honestly, limited just means frustration to me. I like the ability to hold a game in my hand, don't care how many exist. You guys get my money by releasing games I want, which is a really good point. But again, that goes right in the face of what Limited Run Games stood for in the first place, which is limited the amount of supplies of the games that are out there. People want to hunt those games down. Collectors want the challenge, the chase. That's what Limited Run's sales pitch was built upon in the first place. So yes, the open pre-orders are great, but at the same time, it kind of dives a little bit into the limited. Yes, they're limited to just the pre-orders, but if everyone can get it, a lot of people might not have that urge to chase after it. Edward Torres says, yeah, it seems there is a new company every month now. I really have to pick and choose what games I want as it's impossible to keep up at this point. That is the biggest problem with all of this. If I Am 8-Bit sold Earthworm Jim and they were the only company out there doing a limited stock version of a game, if Limited Run Games didn't exist, if Strictly Limited didn't exist, if Play Asia didn't do limited runs, if publishers themselves didn't do limited runs of specific special editions, if I Am 8-Bit was the only company out there doing Earthworm Jim and it was limited to 2000, I would be more interested in buying it. Which is stupid, I know, but that's my mentality when it comes to limited run games. Because there are so many options out there, so many different companies selling so many different games, it's impossible to keep up. And because of that, I personally have stopped buying any limited run games from any company. And I used to be somebody who bought a lot of limited run games from Limited Run. But that was before all these other companies came out with these limited versions of stock, and I just got inundated with the supply and gave up. I completely gave up, I'll be real with you guys. But that's where we stand right now with Limited Run Games, and Douglas Bogart, the owner of Limited Run, stating in a tweet that he believes the industry is too many people selling the same product here. Too many people in a limited run market. That's not good for his company. The exposure you would think on the surface is great, But when you actually get down to the nitty gritty, it's just too much for the average consumer to keep up with. So I sympathize, I empathize, I understand where he's coming from. And it's a weird dynamic that we're in right now where we're getting plentiful supply of games we were begging for. And now it's almost like too much of a good thing might be a bad thing, at least when it comes to businesses. As far as the consumers, more choice is always a good thing. But as far as the business is concerned, it's probably not helping them sell more copies of games. But I'd be very interested to hear what you guys have to say about game companies and publishers and limited stock companies out there that are selling these games. If you're just inundated with way too many of them, so you slow down on buying them, or if you prefer the more the merrier, as many companies that sell as many different games as possible, you're perfectly fine with. You don't care about being selective on which games they choose to sell. You just want more options out there. Let me know where you stand on this. I'm really interested to see how much this topic divides the audience. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, you stay smashing. Smash, Smash,